Hi, I'm Jarvis, and welcome to my second channel where I take gigantic creative risks, like making videos where I talk to the camera. But seriously, I'm gonna try and make a completely unscripted video, so let's see what happens. I wanna tell the story of how I became a software engineer because I've told it in parts on the main channel, but I want to put it all in one place so that people who are curious about like career paths and how people end up in this career can maybe learn from my experience. Also, I've never done a story time video, so this seems appropriate. So the story of me becoming a software engineer starts in middle school. I didn't become a software engineer in middle school, but that's where the story starts because I was exposed to technology and coding for the first time, but I didn't really know it. Let me explain. So I went to a middle school that had a technology program and they taught us how to use like Microsoft Office, and they also taught us how to use Macs and how to make websites using WYSIWYG editors like Microsoft Front Page and Dreamweaver, as well as some of the Adobe suite. So that was the first time that I used Flash or Photoshop or anything like that. And I used to love to draw, and I really loved animation, and I really loved Dragon Ball Z specifically, and I loved Flash games because it was like 2003 and that was like what you did on the internet. But so yeah, I kind of learned how to use Adobe Flash in class a little bit, and I started using it to like draw characters and make like stick figure animations and stuff. And then when I wanted to make interactive stuff, like interactive Flash websites, which were a thing back then, and games, I would enlist the help of this guy who sat behind me who just knew ActionScript, and he just like always knew the code that I had to paste in order to get the behavior that I wanted. And so I knew that code was a thing, but I didn't really understand it outside of the context of making animations or games. And then, and we also got to do this like interactive, game where you taught a robot how to find its way out of mazes using logic, but it was like a visual programming game, and I had no idea at the time. But I think that was the first time I got to think in this like programmatic way. And then didn't do any coding. Nothing, made some websites and stuff, but mostly with Dreamweaver. And then got really into like graphic design from that mostly. Then fast forward to high school, sophomore year, my really good friend Russell and I tried to learn to code because we listened to this podcast called Geek Nights and thought it sounded really cool. So our first try was to learn C++, and we walked through this like really old C++ book and did a couple of like Hello World exercises and really quickly gave up because C++ is like a very hard language to start with if you don't have any patience or an understanding of programming already. I should say that we were not very committed sophomores in high school. We like were just like trying to learn something, and then it started to feel like homework, and so we were like, no. But much simpler than C++ was a programming language that was actually built into our TI-84 calculators called TI Basic. And Russell showed me TI Basic, and I kind of just started writing like very simple programs in it in the back of my chemistry class and other classes because it would look like I was doing work, and instead I was just like trying to write a dumb program. And so that was my real introduction to programming. I from that picked up Python. Like I knew that Python was something that I might want to learn, and I went to codingbat.com, which I think is still around, and started trying to do Python exercises that I was very bad at because I had no formalized training, and I'm a very practical learner. Like I don't learn very well from textbooks. So through the end of high school, I didn't really become much better at programming. I just like I made a Yo Mama joke generator in TI Basic and like could make little symbols move around with the keypad. Like it was pretty basic stuff. But it built a little bit of a foundation for me. And it was enough that when I chose my major, I was like, I haven't taken any formal classes in computer science, but it seems super interesting. So I decided my major was going to be computer science because I wasn't really interested in any other majors that I knew about. And I also decided kind of last minute to go to Georgia Tech because I was able to get a scholarship there. I think it was really important that I went to Georgia Tech because there was a big community there around engineering and the College of Computing. And I just immediately, was hooked up with people who were further along than me in my studies and in that field and could give me advice and kind of show me the ropes a little bit. I took a very practical and hands-on CS1 course, like Intro to Programming, that was taught in Python, which is a very friendly beginner language and a language that I still use professionally to this day. So it's I think I love Python so much. I think it's like the best language in the world for me, for everything that I want to do. And we would program these little robots called scribblers. And they had like little cameras on them, and we could like make them move left and right and avoid walls and like take photos and stuff and play songs. And that was really cool. It was cool to see like this practical application of programming, and being surrounded for the first time by people who were further along in that field made me aware that it was something that I could sink my teeth into. I also really benefited from the fact that within the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, there were a number of student organizations. There were orgs on things from like web development to mobile development to whatever, and it was just like really fun to learn and do practical things with friends. And I really credit a lot of my rapid like growth in programming, which I was very new at, to being surrounded by a lot of people who were doing it and learning a lot about the industry and having support in my classes. Like I remember I was starting to get bored. Like I really enjoyed my first CS class, but I was starting to get bored of the material because like I wanted to work ahead because I thought what we were doing was really interesting. And I remember one night, it was like 10 p.m. I was in the student lounge for the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. And one of my friends who was a junior at the time like heard me complaining that I wanted to like, I wasn't sure what to do next because I was starting to get bored in my class. And he just right there from like 10 to midnight over 2 hours, like taught me most of the curriculum for my next CS class that I was going to take, which was like an intro to object-oriented programming. And that primer that he gave me was so like useful that I started getting into mobile app development because I knew enough about Java now to like make things. And that winter break, I made my first app with my friend Russell. He ended up getting a summer internship at AOL doing Android stuff, and that started a career for him doing Android, and he's still an Android developer to this day. And I got an internship doing Android my second semester at college. And to talk about like how beneficial networks are and referrals are and things of this nature, like I benefited greatly from the fact that I knew people in the mobile app developers club at Georgia Tech who knew of an opening on campus and thought I could do it and just like referred me for the job. They were like, hey, here's Jarvis. He like made this like very stupid app. You should pay him money for code. That was my first internship, and it was an amazing experience to like already get something on my resume. And at this point, I was starting to learn more about the industry and say, oh, okay, I really do think I should try to make this a thing, move out to Silicon Valley one day, blah, blah, blah. Like, I want to work at Google. That seems amazing. And so then I set my sights on Google and I tried everything I could to work at Google. Like, I was going to study abroad the summer of my freshman year, but instead I took classes because I knew I needed to take data structures and algorithms in order to prepare myself for technical interviews because I wanted to start doing technical interviews as soon as possible. So when the career fair came around in the fall, I was already like ready to start interviewing places, and I did get a couple of interviews. I remember I interviewed at Yelp, where I would eventually intern and then work for a couple of years. And the person who I interviewed with my sophomore year was like, hey, this is a long shot, but we want to interview you because we think you have interesting experience for someone at your level. And I failed that interview. Like I didn't make it past a certain point, and that's okay because I came back the next year and I did get that offer. But getting those experiences interviewing and trying to like put myself in the most, for me, I'd say the most competitive environment. Like I like environments that like challenge me, and you know that saying that you're like the average of like your 5 closest friends or something like that. I just wanted to surround myself with people who were better than me and always be the dumbest person in the room so that I could try and be a sponge and get better as fast as possible. Also around this time, I had another friend of mine who was an upperclassman be like, I'm going to teach you how to do technical interviews. And then he started like drilling me on technical interview questions and doing mock interviews with me and kind of like teaching me the ropes. And he had interned at Facebook and he had worked other places. So he's like, I think I can teach you what you need to like get hired. And he's another person who I'm still like, who I still talk to today. Yeah, like I think about my journey and I'm just like so fortunate to have been connected and to put myself in the situations to be connected with so many people who wanted to help me and who saw something in me. And that's why I talk about the value of community a lot. And so a combination of me like setting myself up to get more interviews and have a resume. Like I already had an internship experience, so I was starting to talk to companies. I ended up getting an offer from ConocoPhillips, an oil company, for an internship, but they didn't necessarily have software engineering internships. It was more of like this general technical role that I wasn't super keen on, but I was excited to have like my first offer that was like outside of Atlanta. But then I also knew that I was potentially in the running to talk to Google. And after I failed my interview, but then they wanted to consider me for this other position, I made a whole video about that. So I kind of just let the offer slide. Sometimes you're going to get offers and you're not going to take them, and you're not going to have anything backed up because you want to take the risk and you think that there's like something that's more aligned out there for you. And for me, it was like, fingers crossed I get Google. I want to take this chance. I don't want to sign this other offer and then not be able to work at Google if they come through. And it just so happened to come through. And then I interned at Google that summer of my sophomore year. It was amazing. I had to deal with a lot of my feelings about imposter syndrome, which is something I made another video about. And ultimately, I came away from that feeling much more capable and much more like I belonged. And I don't think a lot of people have that. And so I'd already kind of been like brought into the Silicon Valley world. Like I went to, like for that, I was at Google headquarters. So I was seeing Silicon Valley for the very first time. I was like living on the other side of the country. So much of this is like osmosis, right? Like just being in the atmosphere where all the stuff is happening, being in Silicon Valley where like everybody's talking about this stuff all the time. At this point, it's kind of exhausting, but back then I was like a sponge and I just wanted to like take it all in. So then I come back to school with Google on my resume and like my head held high. And I thought I was hot shit, to be honest. Like I thought that I could work wherever I wanted, and not like in a bad way, but I was like, oh, I really want to try something out next. Maybe I'll work at Facebook or whatever. And there was some truth to that. Like because I had Google on my resume, I was basically getting interviews with everybody. So that's another place where like privilege comes in. The people who are lucky enough to work at Google early on probably have this like compounding benefit of like, people do this thing, like recruiters and people do this thing where if you see Google or like a big company on the resume, they just assume that the person's good because they've already been vetted by this big company. And there's some truth to that, but there's also like probably a lot of bias. And I remember I still wasn't amazing at technical interviewing, and I was still very early on in my career. Like I'd only been coding for like a year and a half at that point. So I remember doing an interview at Facebook that went really poorly. Interviewed at Microsoft. Both the previous year where I went on site and I remember I got flown out to Seattle, interviewed. It was like the worst interview. I've never felt worse about an interview. And then the next year I interviewed again, and that was when I like quote unquote stormed out of the interview. I made a video about that. What I didn't say in that video is that I did end up getting an offer because the question that they asked me was kind of a trick question, and they passed me along. And then I remember going to Seattle to finish interviewing, and they brought that question back up again, and I had done the research at that point to know what the answer was, and so that was really interesting. But I never ended up working at Microsoft despite getting an offer to work there. Where was I? So yeah, junior year I come back and I didn't get an offer at Facebook, and I remember like I made this doc of everywhere I interviewed and like what questions they asked me, and I was like 50-50 I think, and that's why you got to really just put your resume out there. Like before I worked at Google, I would send out 100 resumes and like one person will call me back, and after Google more people were calling me back. But even though I was doing a lot of interviews, I think I was getting like 50-50 offer rate, right? Like which is a pretty high percentage like when you think about it, but I definitely wasn't trying to put my eggs all in one basket. So Facebook didn't work out. A couple of other places did. One of those was Yelp, and Google also gave me an offer to return back. I made a video about that as well, why I didn't go back to Google. Ultimately I just wanted to try something new and sort of get a feel for more of the surface area of the industry. At that point, I was still like feeling pretty self-conscious about my abilities. So I was constantly taking CS classes. I have a video where I go through my resume, and where I go through my transcript. And you would see, if you looked at that I took like all of my CS curriculum in like the first 2 years of college. I took senior design in my sophomore year, all because I was like trying to get enough information to feel like I belonged. Interned at Yelp, and it was great. I think that like with big companies, it's hit or miss. Like you can have the best experience, you can have the worst experience. It really does depend on who is around you. And for me, I had a really, really good intern mentor who like took me under his wing, helped me learn like back-end web development, which is like kind of what I do now, and was just really thoughtful, and also was a great role model for like asking questions himself. Like he was very well respected, but wasn't afraid to tell someone when he didn't know something or when he didn't understand something. And that was the first time I'd seen that, because like there's this big thing in Silicon Valley where like people are like really stuck up and really know it all, or at least some people are, and those people kind of drown out the others. And I made a video about that. I think a vulnerability video that like nobody saw. I might re-upload that to this channel because like literally nobody saw that video. At the end of that summer at Yelp, I had an amazing experience. At the end of that summer at Yelp, I got an offer to return full time. So this is my first full-time offer as a software engineer. And I was going back to school for my senior year and kind of on the fence about, you know, what I was going to do the next year. But I kind of took a leap of faith and decided to like not interview anywhere else, which I think I would not recommend you do that. Like as great as my experience was at Yelp, like you should definitely like give yourself the most options possible. Like I would have been able to get the full-time job at Yelp without signing the offer immediately after my internship and interviewed other places and stuff. Like don't do what I did, but it did have some benefits. So I signed a full-time offer like in summer 2013 and I wouldn't graduate for like another year. And the reason I did that is because I really wanted to study abroad. So I studied abroad my very last semester of college. And I also had a very light load the rest of college. And because I didn't have to also be interviewing, because a lot of my friends were stressed out from interviewing and stuff, I could really just chill. And it was probably the most relaxing time of my life. And so I don't regret that. The reason I did it like that was because my manager at the time told me that it's not very often that you get long breaks off. You either have to be between jobs or you just graduated, and sometimes you like can't afford to take the time off, so you have to go back to working and you can't take vacations for that long. So like appreciate this time. And so I did. I basically took like a long year around because I could have graduated in 3 years instead of 4, but I wanted to graduate with all my friends and stuff. So I just figured I'd take the victory lap or take the scenic route, so to speak. After I did some part-time work for Yelp and did basically another internship remotely. I took some more CS classes. I took some special topics classes that weren't required for my major, like a class on C++ and, you know, some classes on computational photography and stuff, things that were interesting to me because I had some space in my schedule. So I flew from Atlanta to Barcelona to do study abroad, and then I flew from Barcelona to San Francisco to like start my new life as a software engineer. And yeah, that's the story of how I became a software engineer. It had its trials and tribulations, but I think the biggest takeaway for me, and the reason I talk about this so much, is the community that I was around, the community that I was with, is basically the only way that I succeeded and even saw the opportunity that I could potentially have. If it weren't for those people, then I wouldn't have even been shooting for any hire. One thing I often think about is like I was between going to the University of Florida and Georgia Tech, and I'm from Florida originally, and I would basically pay way less money to go to Georgia Tech, even though I got a scholarship. And the moment I like didn't know that I was making the right call, but the moment that I knew that I did was I was talking to an engineer from Amazon at a career fair, and they were telling me they were from University of Florida, and they described the way that they got their job as like their manager finding them. And for me, like they had to be found and discovered, whereas like at Georgia Tech we were regularly like being brought to companies. Like there were tons of career fairs, all the biggest companies were there. So I just felt like I was exposed to the opportunity a lot more than I would have been otherwise. Also, some things that really helped me along my path is that I'm not a very good student. Like I get good grades, but I shouldn't. I just like get lucky, or I'm one of those people. And oftentimes I like would procrastinate my schoolwork by taking Udacity classes. Like I took the Udacity class on web development that was taught by Steve Huffman, the CEO of Reddit, and other things like that, where I was kind of working on side projects here and there. Like I was doing hackathon, and I'll talk about this stuff in another video. I was doing side projects, I was working on hackathons. Like my whole life was software, and my current life is not software. Like I don't think I could have sustained that. And some people can. Some people like find their calling and they stick with it. And for me, I like got in, I like fully like submersed myself, and then I was like, I'm done. I don't want to, or I'm done in the sense that I don't want to do this fully anymore. So when I got into, no, there's weird beeping happening. This is the kind of stuff that I would never put on the main channel, but you're gonna have to deal with it. So when I got into industry, I made sure that my life wasn't just programming, and I got into improv and I started doing other things because I was just getting a little oversaturated with tech. And now I really do love the fact that I went so deep on tech in college, because all of those skills have kind of compounded and become much stronger over time and stuff. So if you want to become a software engineer and want to take anything from my story, just keep doing the parts of it that are super interesting to you, because I learned so much more from just like randomly fooling around than I did from my classes, because of the way that I learn, not because of the classes. Like, my classes taught me so much stuff, but I just learn more practically. I learn by doing a lot, so I needed to be doing. And so take stock of what kind of learner you are, and surround yourself with really good people. And don't be discouraged if you're not someone who got really good grades, because I think that, you know, for example, I know someone who got a 4.0 from Georgia Tech, who focused on school a lot and didn't really care about industry and making stuff, and so they just focused all their time on school. And then I know somebody who got like a 2.7 at Georgia Tech, and because they spent all of their time making stuff and focusing on making things. And if you saw those two people's like GPAs only, you would be like, oh, this person's clearly better. But then the person with the 2.7 GPA went on to work at Google and went on to do really great things. And the person with the 4.0 also went on to do great things, but like their career wasn't, it wasn't their passion, you know? So if you find a passion inside of this space, then definitely try to lean into that and like leverage that as much as you possibly can, because I think that we're the best at the things that like captivate us and we're super interested in, because we will have much more grit doing those things. Yeah, so that's how I became a software engineer. Let me know how you feel about this video that I literally just sat down and spoke at you with no script or plan. But that's what this channel is for. It's for experimentation. So catch you next time.